My name is Elaine Porter and I'm 66 years old. I retired 3 years ago. Gordon retired later than I did and today was his first official day of retirement. I had been busy since 6 that morning. Honey-glazed ribs were his favorite. The trout had to be fried in 2 batches so the skin would turn crisp. The mashed potatoes needed extra butter, and the cold green bean salad had to be sprinkled with the crushed red pepper he liked. After setting 4 dishes and a pot of soup on the table, I took off my apron and wiped the grease from my hands with a towel. Gordon came out of the study holding a letter. "Elaine, sit down. There's something I need to discuss with you." He spread the letter across the dining table without even picking up his chopsticks. It was the final benefit statement from the municipal retirement system. The number was there in black and white. Beginning the following month, he would receive $5,100 a month in retirement income. "We've worked hard all our lives. From now on, we should both be able to live the way we want." Gordon took off his reading glasses, speaking in the same tone he had once used to chair budget meetings at City Hall. "I've been reading a lot of articles about retirement lately. A lot of financial experts say that as couples get older, it becomes even more important for them to remain financially independent. From now on, we'll split the utilities, groceries, condo fees, and all other fixed household expenses 50-50. We'll each manage our own money and neither of us will depend on the other. That way, everything stays clear and fair." I kept my hands in my lap and said nothing. Then he added, "Don't take this the wrong way. I'm not trying to create distance between us. I'm respecting you and I'm respecting myself. You get $1,700 a month and I get $5,100. We'll each spend our own money without interfering in the other person's finances. That's what dignity looks like." Dignity. As that word left his mouth, I looked at the number on the letter and suddenly felt as if all the warmth had vanished from the food covering the table. 30 years earlier we had sat across from each other at another dining table. There had been no food on that table, only a job offer I had brought home from the factory. I was 36 and one of the factory's most experienced quality control inspectors. After 2 rounds of interviews, I had officially been offered the position of production line supervisor. All I had to do was sign the transfer papers. My pay would go up and I would have a chance to move into management. Gordon gripped my hand so hard that his knuckles turned white. "Elaine, my mother can't even get out of bed by herself anymore and Evan is only 3. City Hall is about to put me in charge of the entire budget team. I clearly have more room to advance than you do. Take a step back for now and shoulder the responsibilities at home. Once I get promoted, our entire family will have a better life." I asked him, "What about my supervisor position?" He said, "The sacrifice you make for this family will be your greatest contribution. I'll remember it for the rest of my life." I turned down the position. To make sure I could drop Evan off and pick him up on time, and to care for my paralyzed mother-in-law, I transferred from quality control to an inventory clerk position. The hours became predictable but my pay dropped sharply and I lost every chance I had to advance. That one step backward lasted 10 years. My mother-in-law could not turn herself over, bathe or use the bathroom by herself. I was the one who changed her sheets, washed her body and cleaned up after her every day. Gordon went to City Hall each morning in a shirt ironed without a single wrinkle. When he came home at night, the most he ever said to me was, "You've worked hard." During those 10 years he went from assistant manager of the budget team to department manager, then deputy director of the budget office, and finally retired as director of the city's finance department. I was already 46 when my mother-in-law died. By the time Evan was grown and I tried to return to my original career path, it was too late. My salary had barely increased for years and my retirement income would forever remain in a lower tier. Gordon's $5,100 a month had not fallen out of the sky. It contained the days and nights I had spent caring for his mother, the more than 20 years I had spent standing over a stove, and the grievances I had swallowed for 30 years. "Elaine, did you hear what I said?" I came back to myself. Gordon had already put a rib in his mouth, and his chopsticks were reaching for the trout. I did the math. Utilities and internet run about $300 a month, groceries are $750, and the condo fees, insurance and other fixed expenses come to another $650. That's $1,700 total. We each pay $850 and whatever is left is ours to spend. That's fair, isn't it? $850. My entire monthly retirement income was only $1,700. I lowered my eyes to my hands. There was an old scar between the thumb and forefinger of my right hand from cutting myself while cooking 15 years earlier. Gordon had been watching television in the living room that day. I had wrapped a bandage around the cut and finished making dinner. The middle joint of my left hand had already begun to deform from years of washing clothes, cooking and caring for my mother-in-law. "All right," I heard myself say. Gordon nodded in satisfaction. "That's more like it. I've always known you were a reasonable woman. Now eat." The ribs turned out well today. Sauce clung to the corner of his mouth. I picked up my fork and ate a green bean. I chewed it for a long time but couldn't taste a thing. When he finished eating, Gordon pushed his plate away. "I'm going to the study to look over my investment account. You can clear the dishes." After taking 2 steps, he turned back. "Oh, and the ingredients for this meal should count toward this month's household expenses. Don't throw away the receipts. We'll settle everything at the end of the month." The study door closed. I stood before the table covered with leftovers and picked up the plate holding the fish bones he had left behind. My fingers dug into its rim, my nails nearly sinking into the rough pattern underneath the china. 30 years ago he had told me to take a step back because my sacrifice was a contribution to the whole family. 30 years later he was telling me that his $5,100 belonged to him alone and that every household expense had to be split 50-50. Then how was I supposed to calculate the past 30 years of my life? How was I supposed to calculate the wages I had given up? And with whom was I supposed to split the 10 years I had spent caring for his mother? I turned the faucet on full blast. The rushing water washed over the dishes and drowned out every other sound. I stood at the sink until the hot water had scalded the backs of my hands red. Only then did I turn it off. The kitchen fell silent. I could faintly hear Gordon talking on the phone in the study. His voice was relaxed, as though he were arranging to meet a former colleague for coffee the following week. I wiped down the already clean countertop 3 more times. I didn't want to stop. Whenever my hands stopped moving, the numbers began circling in my head. 5,100. 1,700. 850. 30 years. When the numbers finally stopped spinning, only one thought remained. If he could calculate everything so precisely, why had he never calculated the value of me? Early Saturday morning, Gordon pulled his dark blue suit from the back of the closet. "Elaine, turn on the steam iron. There's a crease in the collar of this shirt." By the time I took the shirt from him, he was already standing before the bathroom mirror trimming his sideburns. The electric razor buzzed. "My high school reunion is today and Russell will be there." Russell Vance. You know who he is, don't you? Chairman of Vance Industries. We were in the same class in high school. You have to dress properly for an occasion like this. I pressed the iron against the shirt collar and steam billowed over the back of my hand. Then Gordon said, "The reunion costs $200. I'm the one attending, but it still counts as a social expense for us as a couple. According to the rules we agreed on, you're responsible for half. Transfer $100 to me later." After saying that, he went back to the bedroom to change. I had polished his shoes for him 2 days earlier, and they gleamed brightly enough to reflect his face. He looked down at them, satisfied, and left. He came home at 9:40 that night. I was sitting on the couch knitting a scarf. When I heard the door open, I looked up. Gordon was carrying a takeout bag from an upscale steakhouse, and the smell of alcohol followed him from the doorway into the living room. His face held an excitement I knew well. He had worn the same expression whenever he finished giving a presentation to his superiors and received their praise. But the moment he saw me, his smile faded. He set the takeout bag on the coffee table. "Elaine, transfer that $100 to me." I put down my knitting needles. "Gordon, money is genuinely tight for me this month. My mother was hospitalized last week, and I paid $650 for her medication and out-of-pocket expenses. I've already set aside the $850 for the household. I still need to keep some money for my phone bill and my own medication. What does your mother being hospitalized have to do with me?" Without even taking off his coat, he raised his voice from the doorway. "We agreed to split every expense 50-50. Tonight's reunion was a family social expense and $100 is your share. Those are the rules. I'm not suddenly asking you for money on a whim. But it was your high school reunion. I wasn't even there. Elaine, whether or not you attended isn't the point." He tapped the coffee table with his finger. "The point is whether you're willing to honor our agreement. My income is higher because of the decades I spent working. Your income is lower because of your own circumstances. You can't expect me to cover the portion you owe just because you have less money." I opened my mouth but no words came out. Gordon loosened his tie and draped it over the arm of the couch. "If you don't have enough money, the Community Senior Services Center is always registering people for housekeeping and companion care jobs. Plenty of women in their 60s still work part-time and make $2,000 or $3,000 a month. There's nothing wrong with your health. You could easily find something to do." He said it casually, as though he were showing a woman who knew nothing about life an obvious and simple path. Then he opened the takeout container. Inside were leftover steak and roasted asparagus. "That restaurant really was excellent," he muttered to himself. "Russell always chooses a different class of place." I stood in the living room, still clutching the 2 knitting needles. At that moment, everything suddenly fell into place. Before leaving, he had trimmed his sideburns, had me iron his shirt, and made sure his shoes shone. I had not seen how he behaved at the dinner table that night, but I had seen how he behaved around his superiors and other important people. He would never speak to Russell in the tone he used with me. Carol told me the truth a few days later. Her husband, Frank, had also attended the reunion. "Elaine, you have no idea how freely Gordon spent money that night." Carol lowered her voice. Halfway through dinner, he insisted that the server bring out 2 bottles of vintage wine. Together they cost $1,200. When he poured a glass for Russell, he practically bent himself in half over the table, saying over and over, "Russell, you're the most successful one out of all of us now." She paused, an uncomfortable expression crossing her face. When Russell tried to pay the bill at the end, Gordon snatched it away and insisted on treating everyone. It was more than $2,600 and he didn't even blink. $3,800. He had spent $3,800 in a single evening to look generous in front of other people. Then he came home and raised his voice at me over $100. I could no longer hear what Carol said after that. My ears were ringing, like the faucet running full blast in the kitchen on the night of his retirement. I didn't sleep at all that night. Gordon slept soundly on the other side of the bed. He rolled over and mumbled something indistinctly, seeming to mention Russell's name again. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. My retirement income was $1,700 a month. After paying $850 toward the household expenses, I had $850 left. That month I had also paid $650 for my mother, leaving me with only $200. It wasn't that I was completely unable to give him the $100 he demanded. But if I did, I would have to recalculate my phone bill, medication, and transportation costs for the rest of the month. Meanwhile, he had spent $3,800 in one evening using a credit card I had never seen. We had been married for 34 years, yet he had investment accounts I knew nothing about and credit cards I had never seen. But I had to explain to him why my mother had been hospitalized over $100. The curtains were not fully closed. Light from the street lamp shone through the gap, leaving a long, narrow stripe across the ceiling. I had always believed Gordon was courteous to people outside the family because his job and position required it. I had understood. For more than 30 years I had understood everything. But he was retired now. At the first gathering after his retirement, he had still lavished money on outsiders, then returned home and fought with me over $100. It had nothing to do with his job. He was simply telling me that, in his eyes, I wasn't worth $100. I wasn't worth those 2 bottles of wine. I wasn't even worth a fraction of what he had paid for everyone's dinner. His breathing continued beside me. I turned over to face the wall. My eyes were so dry they hurt, but there were no tears. When I was young and felt wronged, I would hide in the bathroom and cry. Now even crying felt like a waste of energy. The stripe of light on the ceiling slowly moved. The night was passing and dawn was near. I remembered what Gordon had said. The Community Senior Services Center was always registering people for housekeeping and companion care jobs. He had said it with the casual ease of someone offering charity. But I had remembered it. At 8 o'clock Monday morning, I went to the Community Senior Services Center. The lobby walls were covered with notices about health seminars, insurance consultations, and retirement activities. Near the front desk was an employment board listing housekeeping and companion care positions for workers who had passed background checks. Before I could take a closer look, the office door opened. Elaine. Denise Walker came out holding a cup of coffee. What brings you here? Is there something you need help with? I tightened my grip on the cloth bag in my hand. Denise, I'm looking for work. I can cook, clean, or keep an older person company. I'm not particular. She froze for a moment and looked me up and down. She seemed about to ask what had happened, but in the end she merely set her coffee on the desk. Come inside and sit down. We can talk this through. Carol was also at the center that day, helping organize registration forms for upcoming activities. The moment she saw me, she put down the papers in her hands. Elaine, did Gordon? Denise handed me a glass of water. Carol mentioned a little of what happened. Elaine, I'm going to say something I probably shouldn't. Gordon spent his entire career managing budgets for the city, and in the end he used his most meticulous calculations against his own wife. I did not respond to that. I'll take any work you have. I can start right away. Denise thought for a moment, then pulled a registry from her desk drawer. There actually is a position that might be right for you. Have you ever heard of Professor Howard Keene? He used to teach literature at the State University. He's 82 now. His wife died last year, and both of his children live on the other side of the country, so they can't visit often. She turned to one of the pages. The professor is looking for a live-in companion and housekeeper. The main duties are cooking, keeping the house in order, reminding him to eat on time, and occasionally accompanying him on walks. No medical care is required. The pay is $3,200 a month, with room and board included. $3,200. Together with my retirement income, I would have $4,900 a month. It was still less than Gordon had, but it was enough to let me live without watching his face for signs of displeasure. I'll take it. Carol gently caught hold of my sleeve. Elaine, have you thought this through? A live-in position means living in someone else's home. What about you and Gordon? I've thought it through. 3 days later, I stood in front of an old house in North Spokane with a suitcase beside me. Professor Keene himself opened the door. His white hair was neatly combed and he wore a dark blue knit cardigan. His back had begun to stoop, but he was alert and in good spirits. He opened the door all the way and stepped aside. You must be Elaine Porter. Denise told me about you. Come in and make yourself at home. Put your luggage down first. The house was not large. It had 2 bedrooms, a study and a living room filled with books. The bookshelves stretched from floor to ceiling. A stack of manuscript pages 6 inches high sat on the coffee table, and several half-read novels lay beside the couch. The house was cluttered, but it was not dirty. My wife took care of all this when she was alive. Standing in the doorway of the study, Professor Keene rubbed his hands together, looking a little embarrassed. I'm hopeless at this sort of thing. I can put water on to boil and forget to turn off the stove. I feel much more at ease now that you're here. On my first day, I cleared every expired seasoning out of the kitchen, threw away all the food that had been sitting in the refrigerator too long, and wiped down every shelf. I made 2 dishes and a pot of chicken soup. When I set the food on the table, the professor looked up from his pile of books and pushed his reading glasses higher on his nose. He stared at the bowl of steaming soup in front of him. By goodness! He picked up his spoon and took a sip. It has been a very long time since anyone made hot soup in this house. Fine lines filled the corners of his eyes when he smiled. Elaine, your cooking is 100 times better than the frozen dinners I've been eating. After living there for a week, I had learned his routine. He woke at 6, drank a glass of warm water, then walked slowly around the backyard for half an hour. Breakfast was at 8. His toast could not be too crisp, and he preferred his oatmeal on the thin side. He read or wrote in the mornings and ate a simple lunch. In the afternoons, he sometimes went for a walk and sometimes had video calls with his daughter in Boston. He never rushed me and rarely complained. After I washed the dishes and put them away, he would say, "Thank you," to me the following morning. Just 2 words. Yet in more than 30 years I had almost never heard them from Gordon. One afternoon during my second week, I was taking the dry sheets off the clothesline in the backyard. Professor Keene called to me from the living room. Elaine, could you come here for a moment? A shopping bag sat on the coffee table. Inside it was a folded camel-colored cashmere coat, its tags still attached. My daughter bought this for her mother. The professor's voice softened. My wife was still alive when she placed the order. By the time the coat arrived, it was too late. I've never known what to do with it. He paused and pushed the bag toward me. The weather is getting colder and you still wear that old coat every day. This will only sit in the closet if it stays here. I want you to wear it. I immediately waved my hands. No. This is much too valuable. I can't accept it. Take it. His tone allowed no argument, though it remained gentle. I know how well you take care of me. This isn't payment. It's only a coat with no one to wear it. Don't leave it hanging in that closet forever. I carried the coat back to the guest room on the first floor. The room was small with only a twin bed, a little desk and a narrow closet. The window faced a maple tree in the backyard whose leaves had already begun to turn yellow. I hung the coat in the closet, ran my fingers over the soft cashmere, and sat on the edge of the bed for a long time. 34 years. Gordon had never bought me a single decent piece of clothing. It wasn't because he couldn't afford to. It was simply that he had never stopped to wonder whether I was cold or whether my clothes had worn out. That evening my phone rang. It was a text from Gordon. I heard you went to work as a live-in housekeeper for some old man. Don't let anyone who used to know me find out. It would be humiliating. Also, this month's condo fee is $480. Remember to transfer your $240 to me. There wasn't a single question mark. He didn't ask where I was living, whether the work was exhausting or when I planned to return. Only two things mattered. Don't let anyone find out. Transfer the money to him. I placed my phone face down on the bed and looked out the window. Half the leaves on the backyard maple had turned yellow, rustling whenever the evening breeze swept through them. Here, a man who had known me for less than 2 weeks thanked me and noticed that my coat was old. In the other house, the husband who had lived with me for 34 years remembered only that I still owed him $240. I didn't answer the text. 10 minutes later, I transferred the money to him through my bank. I left the memo field blank. Every other time I sent him money, I had carefully written condo fee. This time I didn't want to. That morning, while I was making oatmeal for Professor Keene, my phone rang again. It was Gordon. I dried my hands and answered. Elaine, I have good news. Natalie is a little over 2 months pregnant. They just confirmed it. I stood before the stove, clutching the phone. I was going to be a grandmother. Evan is thrilled. But you know Natalie's morning sickness has been terrible lately and Evan still has to work. Once the baby is born, they'll need overnight help and a temporary nanny. That will cost them several $1,000s a month. Gordon paused and his tone became pointed. I've been thinking. You should quit your current job. Come home and start by cooking for Natalie and helping around their house. Once the baby is born, you can help take care of the baby. It would save Evan a great deal of money, and it's what family is supposed to do. What family was supposed to do. My fingers slowly tightened around the edge of the phone. I need to think about it. Don't think too long. Natalie can't even smell cooking oil without throwing up right now. You're already cooking and cleaning for a strange old man, so why not come home and take care of your own daughter-in-law? At least then people won't think we're unwilling to help our own family. He hung up. The oatmeal had boiled over, spilling onto the stovetop with a hiss. I hurried to turn off the burner and burned one of my fingers on the rim of the pot. For the next several days I couldn't do anything properly. I forgot to add salt while cooking. I mopped the same section of floor twice. At night, whenever I closed my eyes, I saw the transfer papers for the supervisor position I had given up 30 years earlier. Professor Keene noticed something was wrong. He asked only once. Elaine, is something troubling you? I told him I was fine. He didn't press me. At dinner he merely added, if something is wrong, don't force yourself to carry it alone. At 4 o'clock the next morning I developed a fever. It began as a low-grade fever and I still forced myself to cook all day. By evening I could no longer get out of bed. My entire body felt scorched and my throat hurt so badly that I couldn't speak. Professor Keene heard noises coming from my room in the middle of the night. He knocked, then came inside. The moment he touched my forehead, he jerked his hand away. Why didn't you tell me your fever was this high? It took him a long time to find the thermometer. 102.6 degrees. The 82-year-old man shuffled unsteadily away to pour me water and find fever medicine. I wanted to stop him, but I didn't even have the strength to sit up. All I could do was watch him carry the glass back to my bedside, one careful step at a time. Early the next morning, the professor found Evan's number in my phone and called him. Evan and Natalie arrived at noon. Natalie was a little over 2 months pregnant. Her complexion was poor and the morning sickness had clearly taken a toll on her. Yet the moment she entered the room, she crouched beside the bed and changed the damp cloth on my forehead. "Mom, why didn't you tell us you were this sick?" There was reproach in Evan's voice. "I'm fine. I just wore myself out. They took me home with them." Professor Keene walked us all the way to the door. He gently patted the back of my hand. "Get well first. Your job will still be here. Come back whenever you've recovered." I spent 2 days in bed at Evan's house before the fever finally broke. On the third afternoon, Evan went to work while Natalie sorted through the old cloth bag I had brought back from the professor's house. I had forgotten that the soft leather ledger was still inside it. The bedroom suddenly went quiet. A moment later, Natalie came out tightly clutching the ledger. Her eyes were frighteningly red. "Mom, is all of this true?" It was the record I had kept ever since the day Gordon announced that we would split everything 50-50. I hadn't kept it to nurse a grudge. Gordon had demanded that every expense be accounted for. I was afraid he would one day accuse me of failing to pay my share, so I recorded the date, amount, and reason for every expense. Natalie opened to one page, her voice trembling. "Gordon bought a $95 box of king crab legs. I offered to make dipping sauce for him. Gordon said that since I wasn't eating any, there was no reason for me to share the expense. My dinner, a bowl of oatmeal I made for myself." She turned another page. "Came down with a cold and fever. Asked Gordon to pick up a box of medicine while he was out. He said everyone was responsible for their own health. Went to the pharmacy myself. Cost $28. The ledger made a faint sound as she closed it. Natalie crouched in front of me and took my hand. Her tears fell onto the back of it, one after another. "Mom, Dad told us you were restless after retiring and wanted to find something to do. He never told us any of this." I opened my mouth but didn't know what to say. Natalie drew a sharp breath through her nose. "I'm going to take pictures of these pages. You get some rest." That night, I heard her talking to Evan in their bedroom. Natalie's voice rose and fell. Evan said very little. Gordon came over early Saturday morning. He was carrying a bag of oranges. The moment he entered, he said to Natalie, "Pregnant women need plenty of vitamins." Then he sat on the couch and glanced at me. He didn't ask how many days I had been running a fever or who had taken care of me. "Elaine, you're almost recovered now, aren't you?" Like I was saying as Natalie gets further along. "Dad, let's eat first." Evan came out of the kitchen and interrupted him. Gordon waved him off. "This will only take a minute." He leaned forward, resting both hands on his knees. "Elaine, there's no need for you to feel awkward about it. I already called Professor Keene." My entire body went rigid. "The professor is a reasonable man." I explained Natalie's pregnancy to him. He said he completely respects your decision and understands that you need to come home and care for your family. "You called the professor?" "Of course." Gordon leaned back against the couch and crossed one leg over the other. "I'm your husband and my name is on the deed to the condo. You were probably too embarrassed to tell him you were quitting, so I explained the situation for you." "What's wrong with that?" A set of silverware struck the dining table with a loud clatter. Natalie stood and walked over to the coffee table. She stared at Gordon. Her voice wasn't loud, but every word was unmistakably clear. "What right did you have to quit Mom's job for her?" Gordon froze. "Natalie, you're still young. You don't understand." Natalie took several folded printouts from her pocket, opened them and placed them in front of him. They were photographs of the ledger pages. "Mom gave more than 30 years of her life to this family. The reason she receives only $1,700 a month in retirement is that she gave up a supervisor position she had already earned so she could take care of Grandma and raise Evan." Gordon glanced down at the pages and his expression stiffened. "Now she finally has a job where she's respected. Without even asking her, you called and quit that job for her. What gave you the right?" "I did it for this family. We will pay for the baby's care and the nanny ourselves." Natalie raised her voice. "If Mom wants to return to Professor Keene's house and work, she will. If she wants to take dance classes or travel, those decisions are hers too. She is her own person first and a grandmother second." Gordon's face flushed red. He turned toward Evan. "Look at your wife. She's pregnant, yet she speaks to her elders in that tone." "Dad." Evan stood in the kitchen doorway. His voice was low but firm. "That's enough. Natalie and I will cover the baby's expenses. Mom should be allowed to decide how she lives her own life. The living room was silent for several seconds. Gordon pushed himself to his feet with both hands on his knees. His lips moved but no words came out. He went to the door to put on his shoes, keeping his back to all of us. Fine. Apparently none of you think you need to listen to me anymore. From now on, deal with your own problems yourselves. The door closed behind him. Natalie crouched in front of me and wiped away my tears. She offered none of those hollow words of comfort. She simply held my hand tightly. The next day I called Professor Keene. Professor, I'll be back at work next Monday. Good, good. The old man laughed. I've been living on canned soup and frozen dinners for the past few days. I'm already starting to miss your pot roast. After the call ended, I sat beside the window. Raindrops clung to the balcony railing and fell one by one. When Gordon called the professor behind my back, he had believed he had every right to do it. Just as he had believed 30 years earlier, that I should naturally give up my supervisor position. But this time was different. After leaving Evan's house, Gordon didn't contact me for 3 days. On the 4th day he posted a long message in the family group chat. Elaine, Evan, and Natalie. Since none of you are willing to listen to my opinion, I won't concern myself with your affairs anymore. The true measure of a person is whether they can plan their own life properly. I've booked a 14-day Alaska cruise and inland tour. I leave the day after tomorrow. The retirement I enjoy now is the result of years of rational planning. From now on, everyone should live their own life as they see fit. Beneath the message was a screenshot of the travel confirmation email. Anchorage, Denali National Park, Glacier Bay and Juneau. The total price was $9,800. Evan didn't respond. Neither did Natalie. I left the group chat. The next day, Gordon posted a photograph from the airport in our high school alumni group. He was sitting in a spacious first-class seat with a glass of wine in front of him. Caption read, "My 6th long-distance trip in the past few years. Alaska, here I come. In the second half of life you have to learn to treat yourself well." A row of likes quickly appeared beneath the post. Russell liked it too. Gordon replied at once. "Let's go together next time. I'll plan the itinerary." Carol put her phone back in her purse and looked at me with a sigh. "Elaine, that man." I said nothing. That afternoon, Natalie came to the professor's house and said she wanted to take me somewhere. We drove downtown and entered an office building. The sign on the 7th floor bore the name of a family law firm. The receptionist showed us into a small conference room. A short while later, a female attorney in her 30s entered. Her name was Monica Reyes and she spoke with crisp efficiency. "Mrs. Porter," Natalie gave me a general outline of the situation over the phone. "I need to confirm a few facts first." She opened her laptop. "How long have you and Gordon been married?" 34 years. "When he announced that you would split expenses 50-50, did the two of you sign a formal postnuptial agreement?" "No. He simply announced it." "Does his retirement income go into an account in his name alone?" "Yes. I've never known exactly how much he has in savings." Natalie spoke from beside me. "Gordon once mentioned to Evan that he had an investment account containing $360,000. He said it was money he had accumulated through a lifetime of careful planning." Ms. Reyes wrote several lines in her notebook. "The fact that the account is solely in his name does not necessarily mean all of the money belongs to him. You live in Washington state. Property acquired and accumulated during a marriage generally has to be evaluated as marital property." She looked up at me. "The court will determine the final division based on the length of the marriage, the source of the assets, and each party's financial circumstances. I cannot guarantee an outcome at this stage. But after a 34-year marriage, you have every right to claim a substantial share of an investment account built up during the marriage." Sitting in that leather chair, I could hear my own heartbeat. Ms. Reyes asked another question. "Whose name is on the deed to the condo?" "Only Gordon's." My voice felt dry. "But when we bought it, $45,000 of the down payment came from my parents. They gave us the money after selling a small rental property." "Do you have bank records?" "Yes. I still have the documents my father left behind, and my brother knows everything that happened." Ms. Reyes nodded. "If the path of that money can be traced, it will be important evidence. The name on the deed matters, but it is not the only factor the court will consider." She closed her laptop and placed both hands on the table. Mrs. Porter, your position is much stronger than you realize. Gordon cannot erase your financial rights from a 34-year marriage simply by putting every account in his name and verbally declaring that all expenses will be divided 50-50. On the drive back, Natalie linked her arm through mine. Rows of buildings slid past outside the window. Mom, have you decided what you want to do? I didn't answer immediately. You don't have to decide today. She tightened her hold on my arm. But I want you to know that whatever you choose, Evan and I are on your side. On the third day after Gordon flew to Alaska, I began taking action. That morning I asked Professor Keene for the day off. He asked no questions. He merely handed me the spare key. If you come back late, let yourself in. I went first to Ms. Reyes's office, where I signed a petition for divorce and a sworn declaration. She also applied for a temporary order to protect the marital accounts and requested that I be granted temporary use of the condo while the case was pending. She told me explicitly, you cannot simply lock him out before the court issues a temporary ruling. Several days later, the judge signed the temporary order. The order did not determine who would ultimately receive the condo. It addressed only the living arrangements while the case was pending and prohibited either party from transferring or concealing marital assets. After receiving the documents, I returned to the condo where I had lived for more than 20 years. Only Gordon's name appeared on the deed. But I had left traces of myself on every floorboard, every wall, and every cabinet. I opened the door. The air inside was stale. Gordon hadn't opened the windows before he left. His expensive handcrafted whiskey set stood in the living room. A reproduction of a Western oil painting hung on the study wall, though he always implied to guests that it was a limited edition original. The closet held 4 suits, a cashmere overcoat and 2 pairs of Italian leather shoes. I called Evan. Please arrange for a moving company to come over. At 3 that afternoon, 2 movers arrived. I had them pack all of Gordon's personal belongings into boxes. His clothes, the whiskey set, the painting, and the trophies, certificates, and old documents from his study. There were 12 boxes in all. Every box was moved into the basement storage unit assigned to our condo. I locked the storage unit and placed the key in an envelope. At 4:30, the locksmith arrived. What kind of lock would you like? An electronic lock. One that opens only with a passcode or fingerprint. He crouched to measure the doorframe, then removed the lock that had been there for more than 20 years. The sound of his drill echoed through the hallway. I stood in the entryway and watched as the old lock cylinder was taken out piece by piece. 40 minutes later, the new lock was installed. The locksmith showed me how to register my fingerprints. First, I pressed my left index finger against the scanner, then my right. A ring of green light appeared around the scanner, followed by a short beep. Your fingerprints are registered. Now you need to set a passcode. I entered a string of numbers. It wasn't my birthday. It wasn't our wedding anniversary. It wasn't Evan's birthday either. It was the employee number I had during my final year before retirement. A string of numbers that belonged only to me. After the locksmith left, I stood outside the door, opened it once with my fingerprint, then closed it again. The deadbolt slid into the doorframe with a solid click, fitting perfectly. I left a copy of the temporary order and the storage unit key with the condo management office, then departed. In the elevator, I took out my phone. There was a new message in the alumni group. Gordon had posted a photograph of blue Alaskan skies and snow-covered mountains. Beneath it he had written, "After several hours in the air, I've finally arrived in Anchorage. The sky here is unbelievably blue." Someone replied, "Gordon certainly knows how to enjoy life." Another person wrote, "Now that is what retirement should look like." I put my phone back in my pocket and walked out of the building. The streetlights had already come on. I walked toward the parking lot, my steps unhurried but steady. As the evening breeze swept past me, I remembered what Professor Keene had said. If you come back late, let yourself in. I didn't look at my phone again on the drive back. Whether Gordon was photographing snow-covered mountains in Alaska or collecting hundreds of likes in the alumni group had nothing to do with me anymore. He could enjoy his complete independence. I was going to reclaim the half of my life that belonged to me. On the 15th day of his trip, my phone rang on a Wednesday evening. It was Gordon. I answered. Something was wrong with his voice. His usual composure was gone, and he was breathing heavily as though he had dragged his suitcase a long way. Elaine, what happened to the lock? My key won't even go in. I said nothing. Are you inside? Come open the door. Is the lock broken? The lock isn't broken. I replaced it. There were several seconds of silence on the other end. Then he lowered his voice, struggling to contain his anger. What do you mean? Why didn't you tell me you were changing the lock? Open the door right now. I'm standing in the hallway with my luggage. You're already home? I'm right outside the door. His voice rose sharply. Holding the phone, I walked from Professor Keen's living room to the window. Gordon, listen to me first. I've filed for divorce. The court issued a temporary order. A copy of the documents and the key to the basement storage unit are at the condo management office. The other end of the line suddenly went silent. I continued. My parents contributed $45,000 toward the down payment on that condo. The $360,000 in your name was also accumulated during our marriage. You were the one who insisted that every dollar should be accounted for after retirement. I paused. So now we'll let the law account for everything. Heavy pounding echoed from the hallway on his end. Once, twice, 3 times. Elaine Porter, have you lost your mind? You're in your 60s. Why would you start making trouble with a divorce now? Open this door right now. I ended the call. My phone immediately rang again. I declined it. It rang a second time. I declined it again. When it rang a third time, I turned the phone off. Professor Keen came out of his study and glanced at me. Everything all right? Everything's fine. I've finished dealing with some matters at home. Good. He didn't ask anything else. He turned and went back to his study. Natalie told me what happened afterward. Gordon pounded on the door for more than 10 minutes, drawing neighbors out into the hallway. He stood there with his suitcase, his face dark red, repeatedly telling everyone that I was mentally unstable and had lost all reason. Finally, condo security and a member of the management staff came upstairs. They showed him the temporary order and escorted him to the management office. There he received the storage unit key and a copy of the court documents. He had nowhere to stay that night. He called Evan first. Evan said only, "Dad, this is between you and Mom. I'm not going to help either one of you violate the court's temporary arrangements." Gordon then called several former colleagues. He told them there had been some trouble at home and asked if he could stay with them for a few days. They gave vague excuses and quickly ended the calls. In the end, he checked into an ordinary chain hotel near the condo. It cost $145 a night. The following day, he posted a long message in the high school alumni group. Carol sent me a screenshot. I read it word by word. "Everyone, I never wanted to bring my private affairs into this group, but I can't keep this to myself any longer. After I retired, my wife and I discussed splitting our household expenses 50-50 so that we could both maintain our independence and dignity. Instead, she went to work as a live-in housekeeper for an old man, and after doing that for a while, she began looking down on her own home. When I returned from Alaska, I discovered that she had changed the lock and refused to let me inside. After 34 years of marriage, she turned against me without warning. All I have ever wanted is to live with dignity. I don't want to fight with her, but this has been deeply painful." At the end, he deliberately tagged Russell. "Russell, you've seen more of the world than the rest of us. Tell me, who is being unreasonable here?" Several people in the group replied. "Calm down first. Husbands and wives still need to communicate. At your age, don't let this get too far out of hand." Russell didn't respond. Gordon posted another message. "Ever since she started working, she's acted as though our home is no longer good enough for her. I'm not asking for much. I only want a peaceful retirement. Why does that have to be so difficult?" After reading it, I placed my phone on the table. Natalie sat across from me, her lips pressed tightly together. "Mom, don't let this upset you. Nothing he said justifies what he did." I shook my head. "I'm not upset. Let him talk." I didn't witness what happened a week later. Professor Keen told me about it afterward. Russell came to visit him that day. He visited 2 or 3 times every year. Professor Keen had been Russell's teacher in college. Russell had come from a struggling family, and one semester he had been unable to pay his tuition. The professor had covered it with his own money, allowing Russell to remain in school. While the 2 men sat drinking coffee in the living room, the professor mentioned me with a smile. "Russell, I couldn't ask for a better live-in companion than the woman I have now. She's an excellent cook and takes care of every detail, but most importantly, she's kind. Every month, she uses nearly half her wages to pay for her elderly mother's care and medication. She won't even buy herself a new coat. Russell asked casually. What's her name? Elaine Porter. The professor thought for a moment. I believe her husband's last name is Porter too. He used to work for the city. Russell slowly set down his coffee cup. Professor, is the Elaine you're talking about in her 60s with a round face and a soft voice? Yes, that's her. Do you know her? Russell's expression changed. Professor Keene told him what he knew, piece by piece. The $1,700 monthly retirement income. The 50-50 division of expenses. The ledger recording every dollar spent. Gordon calling behind her back to quit her job for her. And the night the pressure became so overwhelming that she developed a fever and couldn't get out of bed. Russell sat there without interrupting once. He merely kept rubbing the knuckles of one hand. That evening, Russell finally responded in the alumni group. Carol immediately sent me a screenshot. At the time, I was washing dishes in Professor Keene's kitchen. Russell had written, Gordon, I've read your messages several times. There are certain things I originally had no intention of discussing in this group. But since you tagged me and specifically asked for my opinion, I'll give it to you directly. At the last reunion you spent $1,200 on 2 bottles of wine, then insisted on paying the $2,600 dinner bill. I appreciate the gesture. But today I visited Professor Keene and learned that Elaine is the woman who has been caring for him. I also learned that after returning home from the reunion, you demanded $100 from your wife for an event she did not even attend. You spend lavishly on outsiders, yet with your own wife, you account for every penny, even the cost of a box of cold medicine. And you call that dignity. Elaine has cared for my former professor with extraordinary devotion. She is a compassionate and honorable woman. The way you've dressed up your mistreatment of your wife as rationality is genuinely astonishing. I cannot help you with this. Instead of looking for someone to declare you right, you need to think seriously about what you have done. No one else replied in the group. I stood in the kitchen holding my phone. The faucet was still running, water splashing noisily into the sink. I read Russell's message 3 times. Not because it gave me satisfaction, but because for the first time in 34 years someone, and not just anyone but the person Gordon most admired and most desperately wanted to impress, had said everything I had never been able to say in front of everyone. 5 minutes later, Carol sent me another screenshot. Gordon had deleted both of his earlier messages. But dozens of people in the alumni group had already seen them. He couldn't erase that. 3 days later, a professional process server found Gordon in the hotel lobby and personally handed him the complete divorce papers. Several months later, we attended a property hearing. That day, Gordon wore an old jacket instead of his dark blue suit. He sat across from me. His hair seemed much grayer and rough stubble covered his chin. After reviewing the property inventory, the judge asked whether either party disputed the account balances. Gordon opened his mouth. Your Honor, may I speak to her alone for a few minutes? The judge looked at me. I shook my head. In the end, the court determined that the $360,000 investment account was property accumulated during the marriage. I received $180,000. The condo's appraised value, the remaining mortgage balance, and the $45,000 down payment provided by my parents still had to be resolved through further property proceedings or an agreement between us. Gordon stared at the ruling for a long time. His attorney lightly touched his arm, reminding him to sign. Gordon seemed not to hear. At last he raised his head and looked at me. Elaine, all I wanted was a simpler life after retirement. Split every bill 50-50, keep our money separate. How did it come to this? I stood, pushing my chair back under the table. Looking him in the eye, I gave him the last accounting of our marriage I would ever make. Because you were willing to split the bills, but you were never willing to share the burden I carried for the 30 years before that. After signing the documents, I walked out of the courthouse. It was December. The sun hung low in the sky, but its light felt warm against my face. Standing on the courthouse steps, I took a deep breath. The cold air entered my lungs, crisp and clean. After the divorce became final, Gordon moved into an old apartment building on the east side of town. It had 2 bedrooms and cost $1,350 a month. The building was several decades old, the heat was unreliable and cold air leaked through the windows. Evan gradually told me what happened afterward. When he helped Gordon move, the 12 boxes were stacked in the living room, taking up half a wall. Not one strip of packing tape had been removed. Evan said, "Dad, let me help you unpack." Gordon waved him away. "No. I'll do it myself. Go home. Natalie will be giving birth soon, and you need to take care of her." Evan glanced back as he left. Gordon stood alone among the boxes with a pair of scissors in his hand, seemingly unable to decide which one to open first. For more than a month afterward, Evan visited him once a week. Every time he went, 2 or 3 days' worth of dirty dishes were soaking in the kitchen sink. Takeout containers were piled beside the trash can, and some had already begun to smell. When Gordon lived at home, I had taken care of all those things. After 34 years, he didn't even know which cabinet held the dish soap. Evan's voice was calm when he told me this. He wasn't pleading on his father's behalf, nor was he taking pleasure in Gordon's misfortune. He was simply stating a fact. It happened in the early hours of a Thursday morning. At 2:14 that night, Evan's phone rang. Gordon's broken voice came through the phone. "Evan, come over, my stomach hurts so badly I can't stand it." When Evan drove there, the apartment door was unlocked. Gordon was curled up on the living room floor, his forehead covered in cold sweat. His pajamas were soaked through, his entire body drawn into a ball, and his face had turned gray. Evan took him to the emergency room. Triage, blood work, an abdominal examination and imaging scans. The doctor confirmed that a gallstone was blocking his bile duct. Further delay could cause a serious infection or even acute pancreatitis. It had to be treated immediately. Gordon was given powerful painkillers and remained disoriented. Evan gave the hospital his insurance information, then used his own card to pay the $1,800 hospital copay up front. He sat in the emergency room hallway all night. At dawn, Gordon was wheeled out of the treatment room, still barely conscious. He mumbled something indistinctly. Evan leaned closer but couldn't make it out. Gordon woke late the next morning. He lay in the hospital bed with his cheeks visibly sunken. An 4 had been inserted into the back of his hand, and the skin was already bruised from repeated blood draws. He turned his head and saw Evan sitting in the folding chair beside him. Evan was still wearing the clothes he had worn the previous night. His collar was crooked and dark circles hung beneath his eyes. Gordon stared at his son for a long time. Then he spoke. His voice was so hoarse it was barely audible. "Evan, how much did last night cost?" Evan had been looking at his phone. At the question he raised his head. "I paid $1,800 up front. The rest of the bill hasn't come yet. Don't worry about that right now. I'll transfer the money to you later." Gordon turned his face toward the ceiling, his Adam's apple moving as he swallowed. "We should settle the money properly." Evan didn't answer. The hospital room was quiet for a moment. A nurse pushed a cart past in the hallway. Its wheels made a soft, continuous sound against the floor. Evan pulled the folding chair closer to the bed. He didn't look at his father's face. He lowered his eyes to his own hands. A long time passed before he spoke. "Dad, I'm not splitting this 50-50 with you." Gordon turned his head. "I'm your son. You got sick in the middle of the night and I came to take care of you. This isn't about a bill. It's about family." Evan paused. Something seemed lodged in his throat. He swallowed before continuing. "But have you ever stopped to think that Mom took care of you the same way for more than 30 years before you retired?" Gordon's lips parted slightly. "When you had a fever in the middle of the night, Mom was the one who got up, brought you water and found your medicine. When you came home from a business trip and threw your clothes on the couch, those shirts would be washed and ironed by the next morning. When you worked late at City Hall, Mom picked me up by herself, cooked dinner for me, helped me with my homework, then went into Grandma's room to turn her over, wash her and change her sheets. For 30 years she never had a single day off." Evan's eyes reddened. He blinked hard, refusing to let the tears fall. "You think your $5,100 monthly retirement income came entirely from your own ability? Of course your ability was part of it. But your success was built on Mom giving up her supervisor position, giving up higher wages and taking on all the housework and caregiving. Part of that $5,100 always belonged to her." Gordon remained perfectly still. The fluid in the 4 line fell 1 drop at a time. "But the moment you retired, You announced that every bill would be split 50-50, as though the previous 30 years had never happened. Evan's voice began to tremble. You always believed you were rational and fair. But with your own hands, you destroyed the most precious thing this family had. Gordon's lips moved. What? The word was almost inaudible. Love. After saying it, Evan pulled out a tissue and wiped his eyes. He crushed the tissue in his fist until his knuckles turned white. The hospital room fell silent again. Gordon stared at the ceiling. The tubing on the 4-stand trembled slightly. His hand was shaking. A long time later, Evan heard a faint sound. It wasn't a word. It was a choked sob forced from deep in Gordon's throat. Evan turned to look. Gordon had turned his face to the side and covered his eyes with one hand. His other hand, the one with the 4 catheter in it, gripped the blanket, his fingers curling with the force of it. His shoulders shook again and again, as though he were using every ounce of strength he had to hold something back. But in the end he couldn't. Evan remained seated and did not move. He looked at his father. The department director whose word had once been final at City Hall. The man who had held court at social gatherings and spoken endlessly about dignity. The man who had believed every human bond could be precisely calculated on a bill. Now he lay curled helplessly in a hospital bed like a child, covering his face with a hand mottled with age spots as his shoulders heaved with sobs. Evan reached out and took the hand his father had left outside the blanket. He said nothing. He simply held it. Evan told me all of this over the phone later. When he finished, he was silent for a long time. So was I. At last he said, "Mom, you don't need to worry about him. Once he's discharged, I'll help arrange his follow-up appointments and whatever assistance he needs at home. You just live your own life." I said, "All right." After ending the call, I sat beside the window at Professor Keene's house. Every leaf had fallen from the maple tree in the backyard. Its bare branches reached into the winter sky like a hand that had finally opened. I didn't hate Gordon. But that didn't mean I forgave him. Our 34-year marriage had reached its end. Everything that needed to be said had been said, and every account that needed to be settled had been settled. From that moment forward, I belonged to myself. The following month, I resigned from my job at Professor Keene's house. The professor held my hand. "Whenever you feel like coming over for coffee, Elaine, come. You will always be welcome here." Natalie booked a 5-day vacation package to Hawaii for me. It included airfare, an oceanfront hotel, breakfast, and local transportation. The total price was $3,800. When I took the money from the $180,000 I had received, I didn't explain myself to anyone. On the day I left, I wore the camel-colored cashmere coat and pulled my suitcase through the airport. After arriving in Hawaii, I changed into a long dress and went to the beach with Carol. I stood on the sand. Wave after wave rolled in, washed over my feet, then slowly receded. The wind lifted the hem of my dress. 66 years old. It was the first time I had ever seen the ocean. Carol took out her phone and photographed me. I smiled at the camera. It wasn't the kind of smile I had once forced for other people's sake. The laughter rose from deep inside my chest, as though something suppressed for decades had finally found a way out. Evan posted the photograph in the family group chat. No one commented on Gordon and no one mentioned the divorce. The photograph held only me, the sunlight, and the ocean behind me. Much later, on a winter night, I opened my phone and saw a new message. It was from Gordon. "Elaine, can you forgive me?" I stared at the words. The light from the phone screen fell across my face. After about a minute, I returned the phone to the nightstand and turned off the light. Outside the window, the cold Spokane wind blew through the night. I closed my eyes and remembered the waves in Hawaii, one following another. I didn't block him. I didn't reply either. Gordon had carefully calculated and rationally planned his retirement. In the end, he finally received the complete independence he had always demanded.